The first document I'm going to go through is a PowerPoint that I've prepared. It is not included in your agenda. However, this document will be included in the republished version. So you'll be able to see the screen on your details and up on this screen once it gets up there.
Kate, if I can jump in just before we get going, if I can find it. Start off these meetings a year ago with a quote, it might have been 2 years ago, that was Napoleon Bonaparte. It is, nothing is more difficult and therefore more precious than to be able to decide. So today is our first day of deciding on budget. We're looking at the capital budget, obviously. Proposals are from staff, though it is our budget. It is us to decide what we want to move forward with. If there's anything we don't want to move forward with, that's our decision. I want to consider things carefully. What I'm going to propose, I'm not sure if this is in Kate's. If there's something you want to discuss further, then we mark it, pull it, and have a discussion on it.
Absolutely. I think discuss as we go. If the project is on the screen, have that discussion. This is our main day to discuss capital. We will follow up today on the 23rd following our review of the operating budget. But the intention is that that will be to focus on any changes after today. So if council's looking for more information, addition, deletion, the impact of any changes that come from today we'll address on the 23rd. But we're hoping to get through the whole thing today. Have your questions about all the projects. If you want to make changes, cut things, add things, I hope that you will do that today. We'll discuss it again on the 23rd, and then the next meeting will be the public meeting that will be part of a regular council meeting where we actually approve the budget.
Good, thank you. Go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, thanks. Power. All right, so our agenda. This is a loose agenda. We'll mostly try to get through the sections. The exact timing of the breaks may fluctuate depending on how far we get. But we'll start off with the introduction, and then I'm going to present general capital, IT, and corporate services. Then we'll have a break. Then Pam will come up and present community services and facilities. We have lunch coming around noon, and we'll end the day with operations, water, wastewater, and contract services. Hoping that we can wrap up by 3 o'clock, but I think it will be a full day today. As we just discussed, the goal of today will be to review each project in detail. You're encouraged as council to ask questions along the way, and then whatever comes of this meeting, we will have an opportunity to discuss capital again on the 23rd. So if there's any outstanding questions or follow-up items, we'll be sure to bring those forward at the next meeting. Until now, most municipal budgets have covered operating expenses, interest expense, and some renewal, which generally equals some but not all of total amortization expense. The city's total amortization expense on an annual basis is roughly $7 million, while our capital funding is currently around $2.4. The asset management plan dictates the total investment required in order to maintain and replace the city's infrastructure and achieve desired levels of service, and to take consideration inflation, service level enhancements, and system growth. The difference between our actual funding and the required level of funding is what is known as the infrastructure deficit. The goal of asset management is to reduce this deficit over time. There are two ways to reduce the infrastructure deficit: either increase the level of funding allocated to infrastructure or reduce service levels, which in turn may reduce the condition or the quantity of the assets that you have. In 2013, Council was presented with a draft asset management plan focused on core infrastructure. And core infrastructure is defined by the province as roads, bridges, water, and wastewater networks. At that time, based on our estimated replacement schedules for infrastructure, the annual tax funding allocated to capital was recommended to be a dedicated 1% increase. Council approved that plan as presented. Since 2013, annual levy increases dedicated to capital have fallen short of the dedicated 1% goal, and we're approximately $600,000 short of the requirement. Council will receive an updated asset management plan to be presented prior to July of 2019, At this time, a new capital funding goal will be recommended to meet the updated inventories and capital historical funding increases. Given that the updated plan includes more asset classes than just core infrastructure and that we have not met the 1% goal consistently, the expectation is that the new funding increase will be higher than it was in 2013. The 2018 capital budget proposes total tax-based funding of approximately $2,475,000. Of this amount, $300,000 represents matured debt room that is temporarily being allocated to capital until the City Hall building is finalized and debentured. So in other words, once we debenture City Hall, we'll no longer have that matured debt room available for capital spending. So our total dedicated tax levy to capital without that matured debt room in 2019 is proposed to be $2,175,000. The next slide just shows our comparators, our other municipalities in Grey County. While Owen Sound is contributing a lower percentage of our levy to capital, it should be noted that Owen Sound has the highest levy requirement and one of the highest capital investment programs on a dollar value, second only to Meaford. And as I said, this information will be published at the end of the meeting if that data is useful to you. So included in your capital budgets is a 5-year capital forecast. In this slide, I've separated out the first 3 years based on what is proposed in the budget. There's a reasonable tendency to focus on the current year capital program at budget time. However, it's important to recognize that the capital budget forecast as well. The budget provided includes a 5-year forecast for each division. After applying known funding to the current 5-year forecast, the 2020 tax funding requirement, as it is shown now in the 5-year forecast, is $4.5 million with an anticipated shortfall of $2 million. The 2021 funding requirement is $3.5 million with an anticipated shortfall of $750,000. Should Council decide to modify the current year capital program, resulting in savings in the amount of taxation required, there may be a benefit to setting these savings aside in a reserve to assist in offsetting the shortfall anticipated in future years. Alternatively, you could recognize those savings in the current year budget. However, this will result in an increase to the funding shortfall in future years above what is presented, because it assumes that that baseline of capital investment is growing at the 1%. So if we don't achieve that, we'll be short by that additional amount next year as well. This is a little bit small, but it just shows in our 2019 budget, there are 3 new debentures proposed. One is for the Harrison Park electric and water upgrade. This would be debentured in 2019. This is a project that was started in 2018 and carried over year end. And the payment for this of $59,000 does show up in our operating budget, and it is partially offset by an increase in campground registration fees. The next debenture is the Horseshoe water main replacement. This you will see further on, and this is a topic of recent discussion to replace those water services that relate to the 10th Street Bridge and the low pressure spring system. The payment on that project is estimated to be $200,000, and it will be covered by water rates.
Sorry, Kate, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to wait till you go. But the debenture requirements that we have that are based off our previous capital, so we would take into account City Hall, and we can use the Harrison Park electric and water upgrade, that are going to be new debenture payments. Are those debenture payments calculated in the 1% capital that is tax funded?
Yes and no. So currently those debenture payments are allocated to capital. And once they come on, rather than allocate them to capital projects, it'll switch over to
Operating.
paying that debenture.
Correct,
so
but
there's
isn't
no
that
increase?
But isn't that already a tax funded capital project ultimately? We're just moving it from our capital budget. We don't have a debenture program through. We've moved to operating, but tax funding is still paying a capital project.
So when we focus on the 1%, we're not focusing on that debenture space that's being held. Technically, we're considering that as held stable in the operating budget.
So technically, wouldn't we always be exceeding the 1% capital requirement if we're taking into account that we had a $650,000 Harrison Park electric and water upgrade. And if you're debenturing that and off the capital side, we're clearing that out to put it all into operating.
Correct, you're right. Only the payment is being factored in, not the full investment.
Okay.
And then the final project is the 10th Street Bridge. One thing to note is that this is a multi-year project, so as we have balances left at year end, they'll be carried forward, and only once that project is completed that we'll debenture it and those payments will come on. So once it's completed, we anticipate that the total debenture will be $586,000. And like City Hall, we're holding on to that debenture space until I anticipate the first payment to be in 2022 or 2023, at which time we'll take the money back from capital and allocate it back to this payment. So there won't be a tax impact to the 10th Street Bridge debenture. It will stay on stable.
Through your worship, I just need a bit of clarification. We're using the term debenture. What you're really saying is debt.
Correct.
So the D word is really a debt load that we are putting onto the taxpayer, right?
That's correct.
So my understanding is that council had decided on a 1% as the level that they would strive for to stay within for the future. My question is, do we have a level on the debt load that we are willing to put for future generations of taxpayers if we've already done the 1%? I'm concerned about adding on, and I need clarification.
There is legislation that we are not able to exceed a certain level of debt, and that's based on what the payment on that debt is. It's called the annual repayment limit, and it's saying that a municipality cannot exceed 25% of its own source revenues as debt payments. We're nowhere near approaching that limit, and I wouldn't recommend that we ever get anywhere close to that. The strategy that we're employing right now with debt, or tax-funded debt, I should say, is that those levels are staying stable. There are periods of time where some debt matures, and rather than recognize those savings, we sort of hold on to that, and then we'll bring it back up to that level. But our current strategy is to maintain that level over time. So in the last 2 years, we have seen some debentures fall off. We are holding on to those payment room, allocating it to capital, and then once City Hall debt comes on, it'll bring us back up to that level, not higher. We'll move along, a couple more debentures will fall off, we'll debenture the City Hall, or the 10th Street Bridge, and it'll move us back up to this level. But over time, we're staying consistent at that level.
Thank you.
Kate, if I may, we cannot borrow for operations. We cannot debt in operations. We can only go into debt on capital expenses. So the theory is that if you have a 30-year lifespan of a bridge, of a pipe, of anything, that you will borrow and write off that debt over the 30-year lifespan. So basically, though you're paying interest, you're paying off during the average lifspan of that. In the last couple of years, I don't know how many years it's been, the provincial government has suggested that we should be putting more money into the SOC in advance to start to build reserves. And then the reserves would pay for it up front, and then we'd replenish that reserve during the lifespan of the infrastructure. With the provincial requirement, we're supposed to be putting in money so that, in a sense, that we're paying into the SOC during the lifespan, plus inflation, plus less interest, I suppose. That's great for Mississauga that never ran a debt. They were charging $40,000 and $50,000 30 years ago for development charges because they could. We've never had that option. So City of Owen Sound is caught between the new regime of supposed to be putting money into the SOC to cover off to prepay, and being always debt paying behind paying it off over the future. So we're in transition, which puts us in a very tough position. Am I right?
Yes, if you're going to switch from our sort of debt financing fund to the asset versus prepaying, it's not the legal like the asset. In order to catch up to, or to move to that new sort of strategy, now it's have to demo finance, because you're not going to get that for those
Good, thank you.
So Kate, if the legislation, the debt legislation is 25%, and we're keeping the same level for the most part, approximately what percentage are we at?
Our payments currently are about $4 million. Our own source revenue is $30 million plus
Great, thanks.
I might just mention, though, our own source revenues are always, or generally always increasing. Therefore, that capital line or that debenture limit is likely rising in parallel with it, not just staying totally linear and creating a gap. We are increasing alongside the increase of own source revenues.
is, although we are keeping our debt level for tax-funded debt and water rate-funded debt, our wastewater debt is going up.
Kate, I wonder if you could just let us know, has the city, for future projects, like 10th Street popped up, I think, a year ago as needing replacement, or maybe 2 years ago, I don't know. Is there an audit that you know of that exists that will tell us what 5 or 6 or 10 more future debentures might look like? Do you know what I mean? You've got a horseshoe water main here, you've got a 10th Street bridge. Are there ongoing audits that identify for the next few years what we're facing? I hope my question's clear. Yeah.
I guess I would say that 5-year forecast is useful to look and try. We know what some of our revenue sources are, being gas tax, OCIF, assuming that continues to stay stable. So we can apply those and have a rough estimate of what our tax funding will be, and if we need to do these projects, the only other option would be to debenture if we don't have other funding sources available. So looking at those 5-year capital plans. On the water and wastewater side, we do the rate fund study, and that really looks closely at how we're going to fund water and wastewater projects.
I don't think my question was clear, I apologize. 10th Street is a project, and what I'm asking is, are there any other necessary projects like that, akin to that, which is a $5 million debenture, correct? How do we know that there's not 3 or 4 other bridges, water mains? Like that, that's kind of my question. How do you know that at this point? Yeah. Okay.
Your Worship, I think for me the challenge for council in the future will be, if you look at the progression on that chart where the asset management plan shows our funding needs to go, and you look at where funding has been, council has attempted over the last 7 or 8 years to add a 1% increase to capital, and we haven't been able to do it. We found that too punishing on our ratepayer. Our ratepayer said we've got to keep our taxes at a certain level. The challenge for future councils will be to meld those two together, and in my opinion, it doesn't mean bringing necessarily the tax funding up. It means looking at the asset management plan in a hard, realistic light with our ratepayer and saying maybe some of those assets that have been accumulated over the last 100 years, when they come up for renewal, there may be a conscious decision not to renew some of them. So you start to bring that curve down a bit, as well as bringing this up, and they meet more here as opposed to this one going up. And that includes your debt financing, that includes everything. We may not be able, in the next 50 years, to serve the public with all the fixed assets that they have over the last 100. That isn't only Owen Sound, it's probably all of North America.
Through your worship, you mentioned a couple of opportunities for income to offset the cost. Could we, as we go through this process, consider other options for generation of revenue to offset? You've mentioned water rates. There were a couple of things that you mentioned. Have we explored all opportunities and options available to us in the future to be able to carve off some of the expenditures? Any expenditure that is funded elsewhere can be redirected towards decreasing the gap, or obviously to the asset management plan. And I just have to ask that question. Sometimes you have to say what other revenue sources are there.
Yeah, so certainly in coming up with the 5-year forecast or the 3-year forecast, I guess, on this previous slide, was looking at what those anticipated funding sources are. So what known grants are out there. Certainly if there are programs that come up in the future that we don't know of right now, we keep an eye on those all the time. If there is an opportunity for partnership funding, I know with our community groups, Ms. Coulter has an excellent relationship working with them to identify projects that they may have interest in investing in or partnering with the city. If we go through the budget and you see a project that you think may be something that would be interesting for a partnership, absolutely identify that when we get to the slide. This slide attempts to just show you another source of funds that we have available to us, and I've printed out for you to have as a reference as we go through the budget what our current, or I guess I should say our estimated reserve balances are for 2019. I'll add a disclaimer that we haven't finished 2018 yet, so some of those opening balances are subject to change. And then I've also entered in the anticipated budgeted ins and outs for 2019. So the column on the right would sort of show what I anticipate as funds available for potentially additional funds for 2019 or for future years. So we have two types of reserves. There's the capital reserves. Those are very specific to a project. These are not interest bearing, and council has either set those aside. They're almost like a payable account. Council has set those funds aside for something specific.
I noticed on the sheet that you gave us and this, some of the figures are different. Particularly the RRC parking lot. Our sheet says 62.
Yes, sorry, your sheets are the 2019. This sheet that's in the presentation is at the end of 2018.
All right.
So I wanted to have those 2019 sheets for you to have available for the, as we go through the budget. And sorry, this was more for just an example of the, how we keep reserves. So the first page that you have is actually operating reserves. Those are specifically for more operating budget type programming. The second page are capital fund reserves set aside by council for specific capital projects. And then the third page is our reserve funds. These are more set aside for longer term saving up, not necessarily tied to a specific project, although we often do have certain equipment or facilities tied to them, but more for a purpose, so a different type of project.
And is there then another sheet for development charges reserves?
The development charge reserve is on there. It's on this page, the reserve funds, and it's down in that pink section, which is intended to represent our obligatory reserve funds. So that is the full balance. That balance is broken down further, and I can provide that to council. I'll probably bring that to our next meeting if that's okay, but it's broken down even further to sort of the envelope. So roads, water, wastewater, indoor, outdoor recreation. So our current year capital budget, of the total capital budget, approximately 50% as it's proposed relates to asset management investments, including replacement, rehabilitation, and maintenance of existing assets. The other half of the budget is for new assets, strategic initiatives, including asset enhancements and studies and plans. And this just shows the breakdown. So the majority of our budget is focusing on enhancement and replacement. 3% roughly is for studies and consulting. Annual programs, I would refer to this as asphalt maintenance, concrete maintenance. That's tied into asset management. 1% is allocated to reserve contribution, and then I'm showing 1% for the police budget. That would be ultimately spread across all the pies. But each of our detail sheets does describe where the project fits into this pie, whether it's sort of an enhancement, a replacement, a new asset. Seems to be blocked out. I'm going to say it's around 45% based on the size of the pie. And yes, like I said, when you want to see what those actual projects are, we'll see those on the detail sheets. It describes where it fits in that, and that's where I pulled this pie chart from. Our project priorities, so based on the priority matrix that we use that I have on the next slide here, nearly 100% of our projects, or 90% of our projects, are considered to be in the very high to high priority. Project priorities were assigned to projects consistently across all departments. Each project was scored a value of 1 through 5 for the following categories, which I'll walk through. These scores were then translated to an overall score and assigned one of these 4 classifications. So the evaluated categories that we use would include people, how many people would be impacted by the project, health and safety, what is the risk to health and safety of the public or staff if the project does not proceed, legislative compliance, is the project required for legislative or regulatory compliance, asset management, is the project a high priority for a replacement in the asset management plan, operations, if the project proceeds, what will be the impact on operational performance? Finance, can the investment be leveraged with partnership funds or grants? The environment, will the project result in an improvement to the natural environment of the community? And then strategic priorities, to what degree does the project align with council's strategic priorities? And each of those categories was weighted the same and given a score of 1 to 5, added up and translated to that priority scoring. This next slide shows the total spending in our capital budget by department. So the majority is certainly in the hard services, roads, bridges, water and wastewater. One thing I will point out, though, is that that same distribution doesn't necessarily translate to if you were to split up the tax-based funding or how we're allocating our tax levy to this. It's not necessarily on the same basis as the projects. There are certain grants that are very specific to water, wastewater. We have user fees for those, as well as some grants are core infrastructure grants. We don't have the option of using them on other departments. Unlike the operating budget, where most of the funding comes directly from the tax levy, the capital budget uses a variety of funding sources. That being said, debentures, water and wastewater rates, and reserve contributions were all sourced directly from the taxpayer and make up approximately 64% of the capital budget funding. So I'll just highlight again the goals for today's meeting. We're going to present and discuss details for each proposed capital project. Please ask questions and make some decisions. Although a draft operating budget was circulated to council for context, we're not aiming to discuss that budget until January 22nd, and I'll just say again that the budget that was circulated is absolutely subject to change. I do hope to publish an agenda with a more firm budget by Wednesday or Thursday of this week. We will revisit the capital budget upon completion of the operating budget on the 23rd to review the impact of any changes that came up today. And then once the budgets are approved, we are aiming to do that on February 11th at a regular council meeting, which will be preceded by a public meeting. All capital projects under $250,000 will proceed without subsequent council approval so long as they are within budget. And that limit is set by our purchasing bylaw. Excuse me. Tender RFP contracts over $250,000 will return to council for approval before they are executed. Any projects that are not budgeted or come in over budget must also come back to council before they are approved to move forward.
Oh, Thanks, Mayor. This is probably the best time to bring this up then. In terms of if we're making decisions and finding some alternative spending choices or savings, how maybe do we best want to set aside those decisions or those funds at this time? I'm just thinking, for example, if there's a $100,000 expenditure and council chooses not to proceed with it, and 50,000 of that is gas tax and 50,000 is taxpayer, are you able to establish two separate accounts to kind of bring forward, here's what you have set aside in the taxpayer funded capital, and here's what you've saved off gas tax, so that council can decide then after to reallocate that gas tax funding, so forth? How would we like to do that?
Certainly. So I do have, once I go back, I'll have the live budget on my desktop. So if you're making changes, I'll be able to keep track of room that's created in those different envelopes. And we can certainly discuss today if you want to reallocate that, or staff could bring back some recommendations, especially for those grants like gas tax that have specific purposes. We may come back at our next meeting with some proposed uses, or perhaps just setting that money aside for a future year too, which we can do with gas tax and some of those programs. They can be saved up. So certainly, I'll be able to provide you that information as we go along or at the end of the day.
This time, do you have the numbers off the top there, exactly what are our static funding amounts? So let's say gas tax and the OCIF, like what are those actual dollar values that
So in
you're working with?
2019, we are receiving just over $1 million in OCIF funding. That funding has almost been 100% currently earmarked for the Downtown River Precinct project, which is a multi-year project. So whatever we overspend this year is actually more what we're doing. We'll recover from next year's OCIF allocation as well. And that is a program that we know for sure. We have guaranteed funding and we know the amounts up to 2021. After that, the agreement ends and a new agreement will come into place. So we're not sure what will happen after 2021 with those funds. Federal gas tax is indexed at a much lower percentage. We're receiving $650,000 this year, and that will increase slightly over the coming years as well. And that's a 5-year program, I believe, so we know that we're receiving the federal gas tax funding. Provincial gas tax, so that's money from the province, that's specifically for transit. We currently and historically have been using 100% of those funds to fund the operating cost of the transit system, so we don't have any of those funds anticipated in our current capital budget. Some other grants that we know of that are more project specific is we have our Connecting Link funding, obviously, for the 10th Street Bridge. That's been allocated. We have a downtown streetscape improvement grant, $56,000. Council approved a project for that money last year to replace some decorative streetlights downtown. That project shows up here. Excuse me. The Public Transit Infrastructure Fund is a project that wraps up in, I believe, March of this year. That was a multi-year project, and that's 50-50 cost sharing for transit infrastructure enhancements. So I think there's one line left in the budget to do another bus stop, but then that project will wrap up. I can't think off the top of enabling accessibility are a couple grants that are anticipated in the budget. As we get to those projects, we'll identify them specifically. And I do know at one point there is one project that we know we did not get the funding for. So when we get there, we'll identify that, and that will open up some room as well.
The reason then that we went into a $500,000 deficit in the OCIF reserve is just our spending this year and the Downtown River Precinct.
That's correct. So our Downtown River Precinct spending for 2018 is expected to exceed what we're getting But we're going to get $1.2 million next year, so that'll cover up the difference and have a little bit more to finish that project with the amount that's budgeted for next year.
Okay.
If I just hold on, John, just for a second. If I can go back to Scott's first question. Procedurally, as we start to reject things, I wonder if we want to put them into a hold to be reviewed a second time, not eliminate them altogether. Is that kind of what your question was?
Well, I think we've got lots of options there, and I don't see any harm with that, because ultimately, if we've got, you know, $415,000 of taxpayer-funded capital that we've got in this hold account, we could collectively decide to spend $115,000 of that and $300,000 return.
So we'd put it into a hold fund, come back and reserve those, or review those things a second time.
But then there's the subsequent parts, if we scrub a project where it may have some partial gas tax funding, for instance, where we're going to want to write that spending somewhere else.
Okay, good, thanks.
No problem. Kate, you mentioned the OCIF, which is provincial funding. What guarantees, just, it's sort of a general question, what guarantees do we have that provincial funding flows, for instance, for the river project?
I'm going to say we have a 5-year signed agreement for those funds, so that would take us to the end of 2021 or 22. I'd have to verify for sure, but I believe those funds are secure until the end of that existing signed agreement. There are certainly funds in our operating budget that, when we discuss next week, that are much questionable. Either the agreement period has ended or it's an annual agreement. So those ones, I think, are more at question. But I do believe that our OCIF funding will be stable at least till the end of the current agreement.
And just for the benefit of new councillors then, from time to time they offer you signed agreements, and from time to time it's purely an annual payment that may be discretionary and may be cut off by the province later? Like, I'm just trying to understand the distinction.
Yeah, so sometimes we have multi-year programs. Our 3-5-year agreements, our gas tax funds are set up that way. Our OMPF is an annual allocation, and we get that notification once a year. We don't have it yet for 2019, so we are anxiously awaiting to find out what that will be. But for the most part, we do have multi-year signed agreements. That being said, some of those multi-year signed agreements ended, usually at the provincial year end, which would have been March 2018, and we're still waiting to find out what the new, potentially multi-year agreement will look like.
So as we go through this process, knowing that the funding source may be a little shaky provincially. Okay. Not on capital. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't think I'll go through this document, which was attached to your agenda. This talks a lot about the information I already went through, but it also just talks about sort of how to read and interpret your budget. So as you know, every division provided a 5-year forecast, as well as a current 2019 budget, including proposed funding sources, and then we get into the detail sheets for each division. So if it's all right with council, I'll move right into the corporate services and IT detail sheets. So going through in the same order that you have in your agenda, we'll start with IT. And we may come back to this page, so if you want to switch back to this sort of current year budget, just let me know and we can switch back and forth. But the current project is our replacement computer program. So this will replace approximately 21 workstations. The workstations generally last 4 to 5 years before they need to be replaced. And we are working towards a mobile workforce that allows staff out in the field to work out in the field as opposed to having to come back and use a desktop environment. The city currently has around 200 active workstations citywide. So if we were to place all of those workstations every 5 years, we'd be looking at approximately 40 units a year. Our budget this year has 21. We do work to cycle computers, so a computer that can no longer support a high user may be cycled down to some workstation that doesn't have the same high level of requirement, and that extends the useful life of these computers. So the ones that were identified for replacement are, in some cases, they are existing computers will move through the system, and in some cases, they are for replacement. This is funded based on who is receiving the computer, whether it's a tax-funded department or if it's a water or wastewater computer, it's funded through those rates.
Kate, just on the computer capital, when I look at the totals across from 2019 to 23, that total, so he's spending 80,000, 29, 39, 44, totals 42,400. So 80,000 this year. If council said, okay, we're going to give you that $42,400, but we want it spread equally over the next 5 years, can that be done?
We do aim to do that. I will point out that one of the items there is our Neptune handheld replacement at $25,000. So that is a specific piece of hardware that's used for reading water meters, and that will be funded through water rates. And we replace those, I believe it's every 5 to 10 years. It's on the sheet when we get there. But for the remainder of the items in that category, we do aim to even it out over time. And you will notice that although the original budget brought forward was 40,000, based on sort of that similar strategy in the actual recommended column, it was reduced to 35.
If we're on there, just a question. Last year, replacement computers in year 2, year 3 in the budget had $0 amounts, and replacement monitors had $0 amounts. Did we not spend the 20,000 and 6,000 in those accounts last year? In which case now we've got 35,700 and what was it, 10?
No, I guess, sorry, we should have shown what this year 1 on this would represent 2019. And we could have shown on here what's anticipated for 2020 and 2021. We did fully spend our replacement budget in 2018. In fact, we slightly went over that because we do on occasion have new positions that weren't originally anticipated or new needs identified where somebody requires a computer before we expected. Also provided was a list of where those computers are going. I would have aimed to hide the staff names. I'm sorry about that. The next item is $5,000 for replacement monitors. This will allow us to replace 25 to 30 monitors at a size of 24 inches, so that's a larger monitor to fit the larger screen, I guess, requirements that most of our softwares and documents have now. Monitors are not on a replacement cycle, and many of our monitors are old and they're still that smaller square monitor. With the move to new stand-up desks, more new monitors are going to be required to accommodate those types of desk situations, and many staff are requesting 2 monitors to expand their desktop, and this significantly reduces the amount of paper that we're using. When you're able to compare 2 documents on screen, you don't have to print and use your computer in combination. The next item is replacement phones. So we have 25 phones due for replacement in 2018, and this sort of follows a strategy of replacing a phone after 2 years. Cell phone issues start to increase after 2 years. We mostly see decline in battery life is the biggest complaint. By keeping the phones on a 2-year replacement cycle, we avoid having critical issues out in the field where phones are needed the most. And we do have a list of who is receiving those phones, as well as who has a city-provided cell phone. I did speak to Sean about this item this morning, and we feel that we could decrease it to 5,000 if we needed to.
One of the sheets that went past on my screen that you didn't hit was a computers to be replaced. Maybe you did hit that. It refers to a whole bunch of tablets. What do we do with the 9 iPads that came from council and have been turned over? Do they go to staff? Or do they cover some of those things? Can they cover some of those things?
The iPads that we use for council are not usable as a workstation computer. It's an Apple-based platform which we don't operate on. The iPhones or the iPads that council had were offered to purchase at the end of the council term, and those that were not purchased, along with any other IT surplus that we have or any equipment surplus, frankly, citywide, those get advertised on a website called GovDeals, and it's kind of like eBay for municipalities where we sell our municipal infrastructure, and other municipalities will monitor that site as well as anyone who knows about it.
Thank you. I had this replacement iPhones marked as a place could we possibly reduce. So just a first question, how many cell phones do we have out there?
We currently have 35 cell phones, city-provided cell phones.
Are we making motions then to reduce?
If you'd like to.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that we reduce this to $5,000.
Do we want to move to reduce that, or do we want to move to put that onto the review list? Up to you.
I can hold that. I won't take that money out. I'll hold that money and show it as sort of capacity created in the budget, but I also do think we can accomplish our replacement plan with $5,000.
Okay, so that motion stands.
Yeah, so I'm going to need an explanation. Like, I can't just, like, how are you going to cut it? Are we taking cell phones away from some? Are we just saying you can't get a new phone this year? Or, like, how do you cut that down to $10,000?
Well, without talking to Sean directly, we have 35 phones out there. Some of them are used actively every day by staff. Some of them are phones that we have on hand for staff that are on standby. I would recommend that if a higher use staff member is experiencing issues with their phone, we may replace their phone, but move their phone that still works, just maybe doesn't have the battery life, down to one of those lower end users. And that will extend the replacement schedule from 2 to possibly 3 or 4 years and allow us to replace them on a slightly slower basis.
So maybe this is maybe a suggestion would be that this is one of the things that shouldn't be on a schedule, and replace as you go. Would it be less expensive that way? I don't know. I'm just asking. If we're on a schedule and you're replacing phones just because it's on our schedule, then I totally understand cutting this back to $10,000 or to $5,000. But if
I could, Your Worship, I think what we're trying to do here, and I'm not an expert in connectivity, but it is everything in every business, particularly this one. And what we're trying to avoid is we're trying to replace these phones when their normal, useful, warranted life is up, and avoid someone being out there, quite frankly, going, I'm out of the loop today. So we're trying to make sure we don't have an issue by replacing on a regular schedule, as opposed to saying, my phone did finally break, Sean, get me a new one. So it's insurance, I guess, is the best way to do it. But I believe what Kate has said, we could probably push our insurance envelope by having some people using a phone that may be 3 years old as opposed to 2, and see how it goes. It's really your call.
right. So what I don't want to see is someone out there that has one of our phones and it's not working properly, and like, I guess I have to use my own cell phone today because it's not in the budget. Like, I don't want our employees running around talking like that.
No, this money would be available for replacement of phones. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to go out and buy 15 phones and have them. We will still replace them as we need them, but we believe $5,000 is enough money to have on hand in order to achieve that over the course of the year.
Any other discussion? Going to call the question. Marion's motion is to cut that from 10,000 to 5,000. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's carried. Thanks.
The next item on the list is our Neptune handhelds. I mentioned this one earlier. These are the handhelds that are used by the meter readers that go around to each property and read the water meter. So our current handhelds have met the end of their useful life, and this will replace them. It's fully funded through water rates. It's also anticipated in the water rate schedule. So we anticipate that we have to replace these handhelds on a 5 to 7 year basis. Seeing no questions, I'll move on to sort of this next section is going through software. So the first item is Virtual City Hall. This is an add-on module to our existing financial information system, which is provided by Diamond Municipal, and it's a Great Plains product, or Great Plains platform, I should say. Virtual City Hall extends citizen engagement and provides more opportunity for citizens to engage with the city online, especially as it relates to their financial accounts. So as you know, council, anyone can pay a bill online. You can go to your bank and pay the bill. You can receive your bill online. This would actually allow customers or our clients and ratepayers to have a user account online and be able to access at any time what their account balance is, request forms, print forms, tax certificates, those sort of things, and make payments. It's just an added level of service to allow for more remote use for people to engage with the city.
Would this reduce need for labor, manpower, people that are doing, for example, my office doing the tax certificates that
Absolutely. So rather than having
probably ask for
to,
100 a year?
yeah, rather than having to send a manual request in, you'd be able to do that request online and actually get it yourself online, not wait for us to respond, but actually print it yourself through the portal.
So will that show up in the operating budget when we get to
Those savings, that theme sort of comes up throughout our budget as we propose these new enhancements that I do think save us staff time over time. That being said, we don't see the staff time savings right away. So if we move forward with this project, there'll be a purchase, there'll be a training, there'll be an implementation phase. It rarely goes smoothly. So I do believe there will be savings. I don't believe there'll be, we turn this on and we see those savings immediately. It will be gradual. So be more likely that we'll see those savings in next year's operating budget and so on.
Is there a way of surcharging Mr. Body's staff for that? Can you get this to be self-funding? If somebody wants to use this system, that they pay $1 or $2 a search?
Well, we certainly do charge a tax certificate fee. That won't change. We could look, if you want to, when we come to our user fee schedule come in the spring, you may want to look at increasing some of those fees to accommodate that we are providing a higher level of service. But we already charge fees for a lot of these things, and we will continue to.
Well, I personally would like to see not to Ian's clients, of course, but generally I think it's a good idea if you can get this to be self-funding. People tack on a few extra dollars, they'll pay it. They might not have a choice.
There's this fair bit of fees now that you're paying for labor. I forget, it's like, the tax certificates are something like $65, so it isn't cheap. But
Considering it's a new asset and it's going to be a new software system, knowing when we look at the Adobe below it, that's $25,000, and we look at software upgrades for municipal, the Diamond again is another $35,000. What's the lifespan of this software for the virtual city hall?
That's a good question. Its lifespan is as long as we use it, but how long do we generally see software be good for?
And then is it fair to estimate that it's going to be back down to a $35,000, $25,000 software increase?
So with those situations and a piece of software like that, it gets rolled into our main accounting system. So then it would follow the upgrade schedule of the main accounting system, which is about every 3 years. So you won't see the $25,000 every 3 years. You might see $25,000, but it's for the entire upgrade to our accounting system, not just that one part. So this is pretty much a one-time fee for implementation and setup. And then going forward, it would fall under our regular schedule every 3 years, 2 to 3 years for our accounting system upgrade.
This is one here where I guess my background to not liking this at this time goes back to last year. We had 4 projects, and I'm going to touch on this through the budget, but one thing, whether I like the spending at budget time or not, when it's approved by council, I expect it to get done that year, and there is a ton of carry forwards going through this budget. And some of them are going back a couple years now, and it's getting very, very hard, and it's very, very frustrating to me to look at why we're not executing on these decisions and in the inclusion in the budget in that year. There's 4 of them last year in the IT, and I know we moved to the building here, and I'm certain that Sean and his team have been busy, but this is something that I think Diamond, the software company, at a trade show or anywhere, and I see it in my business, and you'll see it in yours, I've got a great product that I'd like to sell to you, and you're going to think it's fantastic. At the end of the day, most people in Owen Sound aren't going to remember a login for City Hall more than their initial setup, and then it's done forever until, for some obscure reason, they decide to look back into it, which I can't envision happening. I am very intrigued by Mr. Tamming's idea about funding this by users, but until we get the projects done that council approved last year, I'm not in favor of adding this one. I had 2 points. It was that, and I was intrigued to hear from the mayor as to the legal insight as to the usage for lawyers and so forth. But the idea of making it user pay, because I think this is something that the company has just came forward and said should take us up on. It's a great plan, but we haven't even installed the purchase from Diamond last year that council approved. So I'm not in favor of this myself.
Just a couple of things around user fee and also about new assets, new projects. Rather than charging a user fee, maybe we need to have a section where people can opt to donate to the city for projects. So they're gifting as part of a feature of anything that we put on. We need to ask, and maybe we'll receive. But if we don't ask, it's not as likely. So rather than user fee, maybe approach it in a different perspective. However, whenever new programs or assets are being requested, I want to know how you're going to measure. Is it effective? Did it achieve what you said or thought or was presented to you? So when I see this, I want to know, okay, we're going to pay this money. Tell me how you're going to measure. Did it really work the way you hoped? Was it value-added investment? Did we as council make a wise decision? I think for accountability and during the presentations, I want to know, how are you going to measure it? And what are you going to do to feed back to us? Did it get us what we thought it would? Because this is how we learn to make wise decisions in the future, and I need that feedback as a new councillor.
If no one else is speaking, I will make a motion that we remove the 19A-10 virtual city hall from the budget at this time.
Is this, we've been talking over at the Art Gallery about being able to sell memberships and take donations. Is this the system we'd use? No, it's not. So this would be...
This would be more front counter oriented to allow for the things that people come into City Hall for, the information that they request, to be able to access that information themselves online. So although there are a lot of transactions you can do online through your online banking, receiving bills to your email, there's not an interactive online aspect to our Service Owen Sound counter where you say, I want to see how much my balance owing on my tax account is, and actually be able to see that. This is an increased level of service. If we don't do this project, we will continue to offer our Service Owen Sound support status quo as we have up until now.
Do we know if our comparable municipalities use this service? Do our comparable municipalities use this service? Like, I'm sure the City of London does. I'm sure bigger centers might, but...
Have you looked into what other municipalities are using it? We can certainly get that information. I'm not sure I I don't know of any in Grey County that are currently using the service. A lot of our Grey and Bruce County comparators are using Keystone as their financial information system, which would not have this capability.
I would agree to the comparables mostly, but right now I've got 3.41% locked in my head. So I'll support the motion, and if anyone else is cutting, I'm in.
Thank you. Given this is a moderate project, I don't think delaying it another year is going to hurt too much, so I'm in agreement as well.
The next item on here is our Adobe Acrobat software. So this is a renewal of our existing licenses and adding 10 more licenses based on the number of user requests that we have. So when we buy a software, we buy a certain number of licenses, and that's how many users can use it. This software allows us to create PDF documents, merge PDF documents, convert PDF documents that we receive into modifiable Word, Excel, and PowerPoint documents, as well as to create fillable forms. For example, the budget that was put together for you today was put together using Adobe Acrobat Pro. So we created all of these sheets in Excel. They were then PDF'd accessibly and then combined into one document, which was then provided to you, as opposed to sending you 350 individual pages. That is one benefit of this, but there are certainly others.
What's the difference between 2017 Adobe and 2019? Like, I don't think that there's actually, you were able to do this perfectly fine, correct? It wasn't onerous on staff to develop this document using the existing Adobe.
I'll again refer to Sean as to why we need to renew our licenses, but there is a reason for that.
We currently don't have 2017. We're actually running 11. So we're running version 11, so we're 3 or 4 years out of date with their software. So that's why we're upgrading to the latest version, because there's new features.
And what's the difference between adding 10 more of those licenses?
The number of staff that use the software now, because more of the reports are being sent down to other staff to do, and they require the software to do that.
No, I'm sorry. I'm saying, what's the cost of just adding 10 more of the 2011 product?
We can't buy 20.
Can't buy it? Okay.
The next item is, these are the carry forward items that Councillor Gregg referred to before. So these were projects that were approved in 2018. Upgrading WorkTech to Pearl, that's taking our job costing and payroll software and making it up to date. It's currently way out of date, but also it allows us for remote access into that so that people in the field can enter work orders, timesheets, and those sorts of things, as well as the upgrade from Great Plains 2015 to 2018. Ultimately, we are required to do these upgrades because they stopped supporting the old versions. That being said, the reasons that these upgrades did not happen last year was on the software end. I guess that the overall company that owns these softwares was sold to a new company. There was some staff turnover, and as a result, we did not have a project manager in order to move forward with these projects. So because no one was available on their end, we've been forced to defer them one more year.
If I could, Your Worship, Councillor Gregg has certainly echoed the comments that I've had over a few years as well. Nothing frustrates me more than when we come and council approves particularly capital budgets for us, and we don't get the work done. Trust me, from this table, that frustrates us to no end as well. I will say in the case of software upgrades, it looks so simple when it's up there, we're going to do an upgrade, but I will use the one that we've just gone through, Perfect Mind, moving from class that we'd used for a long time and was a very archaic system. We went to Perfect Mind. We got a terrific sales pitch. I think we all agree this is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. the amount of staff time and angst that has gone in, and I mean collective staff time and angst, it's ours, it still is functioning, it's got a way to go. But anytime we do an upgrade, a major upgrade of our software, it is a tremendous amount of work for staff here, not only in Sean's department, but in all the departments it crosses. So I hate to say I'm going to try to give someone a pass per se, but based on where our staff have been in the last 18 months, it was just, you can only take on so much before you, quite frankly, have breakdowns in staff in this particular instance. But trust me, when you give us the funds, I want to see that work get done as well. And the same questions you're asking, I ask quarterly of why aren't we getting this done? We fought hard to get this money. Councils put their necks on the line to get this tax increase. So we try to watch that as closely as we can. But these upgrades are difficult to drive through the corporation.
The next item is our facility booking software replacement that Wayne just referred to, Perfect Mind. So this project was actually a $65,000 project that started in 2018. There is still sort of a last phase to be implemented that will be done in the early part of 2019. So this is the carry forward portion of that project, which is well underway. I agree it is taking longer than we anticipated. Certainly more staff time, but we are still working through getting this project up and running. And this is the software, Your Worship, that will ultimately be usable at the art gallery for selling memberships and items online. That is currently in here right now, as we're focusing on our facility booking, but ultimately anything that requires a membership or booking. So I know at the art gallery, another thing they were looking at is booking out the rooms and things like that, booking events. So if you're having a studio class, you would be able to use the software to get your registrations. Our records management, this is also a sort of ongoing project. So council knows we implemented the archival storage area in the basement of this building. The next phase of that is to work through the actual software that goes along with documenting not only what's in that archival storage area, but all of our electronic records, which is frankly way more than what is retained physically. And if you're familiar with our current system, it is very difficult to find files. They could be in numerous places. So this software will allow us to streamline where files are located and how you can access them, as well as our retention and disposal will be all automated, through this software. So yeah, there's no tax impact. These funds were saved up for over several years and are ultimately being spent here.
And the implementation of this software doesn't take another staff person?
We have a staff person dedicated to records management. We may need some consulting coverage through this budget, but it will be fully covered in this budget. Next, we're sort of getting into our infrastructure-related capital. I will call on Sean more often if there are questions related to these purchases. The first one is a new firewall. I understand a firewall to be a security device, and this would go at the wastewater treatment plant. $2,000. The next one, a replacement UPS. UPS are used at all sites to keep equipment running during short powder outages and surges. They have roughly a 5-year useful life, and this one anticipates the replacement of 1 unit. Replacement host server, we have 40 servers utilized throughout the city. This is replacing one of them, and they have a 5-year useful life.
Where is this one going to go?
This one will be part of the City Hall Rec Center combo. So there's 5 physical machines between those locations. And that's one of their main
Network switches need to be replaced every 5 years. This will replace 3 of them at Public Works, Wastewater Treatment Plant, and Rec Center, and my understanding is this is what allows you to attach your desktops to the overall server network. High level. The generator at the Julie MacArthur. So council will recall that we have invested in a hot site at the rec center. And what this site does is it duplicates our current operating environment in a duplicated site that we could rely on in the event of an emergency or in the event that something happened to our main site. As we become more, I guess, bound to our technology, the data that we keep, all of our customer information, all of our account balances, tax balances, everything that we have is maintained electronically. We want to ensure that we're securing the integrity of the system and the confidence of our tax base. So in the event of an emergency currently, we could switch over. If something happened to this building and the servers at this building, we could switch over and within minutes be live with all of the same information. You wouldn't have to question that what we're providing you as far as what you owe us in taxes, what you've paid historically, all of that would be maintained. One thing we did identify, though, is in the event of an emergency where you actually lost power here or something like that, it could very well impact the rec center as well. And so in order to support the integrity of that backup, it's important to have a generator as well in the result of something catastrophic.
Does this have to be done this year, Sean? I mean, that's a big number, 25,000. If something happened right today, what happens? Everything's down? And when's the last time that happened? I would at least leave that one out for discussion as we go.
Just a bit more information for me, because I do agree with the need for the backup. But has there any, has battery backup evolved to the point where there's a $10,000 option or alternative to this stationary device where we can fuse through like a super UPS, basically? So if the power does go out, the UPS takes care of it until we just get a rental generator on the site? Or what's out there in terms of that technology world? Because that's, I'm not.
I wouldn't be able to give a price off the top of my head. The equipment that we have will give us 20 to 30 minutes of runtime when the power does go out. That's the $7,000 option. Anything that would last longer, that would be considerably higher. Because you would be having a lot more batteries. So each unit contains approximately 6 to 8 batteries in it. So the batteries are about this big. They're all daisy chained together and they're continually charging. And that's why they need to be replaced every 5 years, because the batteries do wear out. So yeah, the cost of one that would make it last longer would be considerably higher.
And the option of a shared resource or partnership with others who may have similar needs for a generator as a risk management strategy.
I have been speaking with
No, you go ahead.
I've been speaking with Grey County to see if they did want to partner and put servers. At this point, they have said they're not ready for that. They have great roots at this point. But I'm always investigating other options.
Thank you.
I was just going to say that I think this is, I would agree that this is something that's essential for the service. We do know that if we have a catastrophe at the City Hall location, we need to have a backup location. This is something that we've been working on for several years to make sure that we had an adequate backup location in case there ever was an emergency that hit the downtown core. I can tell you that my office has implemented that as well, and we're just a small insurance company to ensure that that way when we do lose something, power does go out, we have access to those files because life still continues in the world, whether the catastrophe happened or not.
Recognizing that, I'm not sure about the rating. You've got it moderate, but from what you're describing, it seems a little nudged up from moderate. Why did you choose moderate?
It's one of those things that if there's a more priority project to be done, then obviously it depends on the project. It's sort of to answer all the questions, and that's how it came. That's how it comes up.
I will speak to that too, and I think this moderate, very high may appear questionable as we move throughout the budget. So we've all used a priority matrix. I don't necessarily think that matrix is perfect and truly captures how we prioritize things. So I think there is opportunity to either weight things heavier or less depending on all of those criteria that I listed earlier. Some of them may be more important than others. Right now, they're all weighted the same. So this was using that priority matrix, and you'll see this throughout the budget. You may question that, and I do too. I think there's room to improve that, but this allowed for us to use a consistent method across that was more, took the professional judgment out of it and just used an equation, frankly.
So is it possible in future then, when you do the human part of the review, to say high, moderate?
Yes, I think there's room to improve that priority matrix in the future, and I think council should have some input on that as well.
Sean, if we put in this generator, does that eliminate the need for the UPS, or is that a duplicate?
Yeah, so there is at least a 30-second delay from the time the generator kicks in to before power is restored. So you need something, just in case something happens, not predicting anything, but at least within 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, we should be able to determine if the generator's not going to work, and they do run tests on a regular basis, that we have time to shut the equipment down. Because it's not good to shut a server off just like that. It will corrupt data, things like that. You have to shut them down in a certain sequence in order for that to happen. So no, you would require the UPS.
My second question, you'll have to remind me, we made this decision. Why did we go to the rec center versus being at fire station, police station, where there already is a generator?
Yeah, we went to the rec center because it's on a different plane. So City Hall and the Fire Hall are on the same plane, so the same level ground. So if a tornado or something came down into what's called the bowl, then it might wipe out everything. Originally, the location was at the art gallery, but that's way too close. I did move things to the Fire Hall, but once again, once we had the opportunity, when we moved out of here, to put it up at the rec center, because that's the ideal location, because it's up on the hill.
As I go through and hear the different sections, in my mind, I'm always doing nice to have, need to have. From a risk management perspective, it seems that this is a need to have rather than regret not having it should something occur. That's just an interpretation I have, but as I go through, I guess I am concerned.
I would agree with you.
The next item on the list is to install fiber in the roads. Projects this year include the installation of fiber into Harrison Park to upgrade communications to the city network. Current park communications make access to the city network almost unusable. Also installing fiber from City Hall to the transit terminal, and this project will move us closer to having fiber, our own fiber, connecting all of our facilities. Currently, where we don't have our own fiber, we do have connections, so we're required to rent fiber. Once we have our own fiber in all of our facilities, the savings will be $40,000 to $50,000 a year. So this project will ultimately see savings in the operating budget.
The question really on this one is, with the park, is this something that the campers are making use of? That's like, what's the data that's so important?
Just to
that
clarify,
internet doesn't
the
work?
project to the park has already been completed. That was our 2018 fiber. That was just in there just so that you could understand what we have been doing on this problem going forward.
Yeah, to respond to Councillor Gregg's question, the campground, or the office where Michelle Draper works out of and staff, she wasn't even able to run our work tech system, so we were using a very labor-intensive process of generating those work orders. So her computer would shut down many times a day just because of lack of connectivity. It will be, however, a bonus to campers.
Just to be clear, the $40,000 to $50,000 savings is all of the fiber, not just these two pieces that are listed in here?
All of the fiber, but we do see savings with every little bit. So anytime we have our own fiber connecting, we no longer have to rent that connection from Rogers, usually, or Bell.
Second question is, we run fiber around that's ours. Is this at some point going to be usable for others and shareable to be used as fiber throughout the community?
Yeah, so generally when we do put fiber in, we run at least 2 conduits so that there will be opportunity for other companies to use that conduit, the second conduit.
So, Sir Kate, back to that, sir.
Sorry.
So this is basically money to connect us to the transit station?
Currently, so we are
Okay.
currently connected to the transit terminal. However, we're using a rented connection.
No, I understand that. So if we approve this today, are we 50% there? Are we 75% there? Like, how much more connectivity is
So
anticipated?
right now, we lease fiber at this building at the water treatment plant, which runs the wastewater treatment plant in the Bay Shore. And then we also have fiber going into the fire hall, which does the fire hall, public works, and the rec center. So what we're trying to do here is connect them all together back to, obviously, City Hall, so that we don't have to lease that fiber.
Right, but
So-
what I'm asking is, if we approve this connection, which I understand is to the transit terminal, are we halfway there to connecting everything? Are we 90% there? Like,
About 25 to 30%.
okay.
So if I understand correctly, you alluded to the fact that we could market the connectivity to other organizations?
We could market the space. We would have to discuss about how we would market that, but the space would be available to others.
The
Is it-
conduit space.
Is it possible then, as part of this, that we could see a marketing plan for the future as we move forward? Because if we're only 20 or 30% of the fiber, and we need perhaps a way to see that there might be some cost recovery or revenue generation. So a marketing plan to align with potential future installation of fibers.
I think what we will see is savings, whether we have that space being used by third parties, we will see savings in that we're not spending the money to lease that fiber. So that will, in itself, will help cover the cost of this project.
Agreed. That's revenue containment or reduction because it's a cost that we're already spending. And what I'm asking for is, can we do revenue generation through a marketing plan as another stream of revenue? I perceive revenue coming into our city as potential savings by reducing the tax levy. So I would like, because we're a business, right?
We can certainly bring that through corporate services, potentials for marketing our conduit space. I would think the project needs to be more further along to completion before it becomes usable to other groups, but we could certainly bring that information to corporate services in the future.
And with when we do tender this, we tend to try and partner with part of the bid process if they wish to run their own conduit inside of that time. So that way they have the opportunity to partner with us for that option as well. So we'd always look at partnering.
I think if I'm hearing you correctly, your long-term plan, though, is also to work in coordination with other ongoing capital projects. So when we do the 3rd Avenue East reconstruction between wastewater treatment and that gives you another connection that the road's already ripped up where we can actually have access to putting this in, and we're not paying the capital expenses of ripping up a road to do it, right? So you are working in cooperation with other capital projects.
That is correct. So we save a lot of money by partnering with other projects. For example, when Harrison Park roadway went in, I had a conduit put in while they were doing the road. Certainly a lot cheaper than putting it in just from scratch. Third Ave, exactly. When they did from water treatment to wastewater treatment, we had 2 conduits put in. And then when they did the second part, from moving towards the Bay Shore, I had more conduits put in to get into the Bay Shore. So as each project is done, we try and partner up to cut the cost down. Sometimes it's not possible because if the road's not being opened up for a long time, but for the most part, we do try and partner up with operations.
Encourage everyone to probably find the link through the county, but go and have a look at the SWIFT program, which is the internet system that part of the county is working with other counties to bring in and talk about how they're going to share services and how it's going to work.
Thank you, Your Worship. This next section is probably 4 minutes. This is a grant program that is already approved, but I included it because it is part of our budget. And then we'll take a break before moving on to parks and community services. So the first 3 items on the list, or I guess I'll move to this. The first 3 items on the list, the fleet management schedule, asset management, and the asset management plan, adding in non-core assets. These are all related to the development of our asset management plan that is coming forward to council before July of this year. This is fully funded through an OCIF program, and it is managed through our asset management and risk management division.
I guess some of my concern is with these studies here, we've got an individual in place in staff that their role is asset management.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there's a lot of studies here that need explained to me why it seems like that's just becoming a clerical position, and I don't think we pay it or recognize it as a clerical position. It's paid and recognized as a thinking position. So why don't we have the ability to do these projects with the position that we have?
The thinking part is done by the position that we have. A lot of what you're seeing here is the cost of, we call it a study because it's going into our asset management plan, which is ultimately not a tangible, well, it is tangible, but it's not a physical piece of equipment, it's a document. So we're building the document with these things. The actual dollars, however, are going to be spent on boots on the ground, collecting data in order to use within the plan. So we use summer students for the most part for these programs, and we do have funding for that summer student. If we elect not to do those programs, I would say we're no better off because we won't have the funding to allocate to something else, but we certainly may not have the resources in order to get the plan up to the level that we would like it to be usable by mid-year 2019. And then the next item is just another program that was approved in the 2018 budget. This is our hearing conservation program. So this ultimately is aimed to reduce our WSIB costs as they relate to hearing claims over time. This project was originally $30,000. We're carrying forward half of it. We have done the investigation, all the testing, sound testing. Staff have had baseline hearing tests done. The final portion of this project will add signage where PPE is required, as well as allow us to purchase some additional PPE that is required that we don't already have. So perhaps staff were using earplugs where they should be using muffs. We'll be buying the muffs. The actual dollar value here of what's carried forward may change depending on, as we finalize 2018, how much truly did get spent in 2018. But this is just to capture that there's that final piece of the project that will be wrapped up in early 2019.
While we're in general government, and I'm not questioning that project, I am questioning in 2017, I think it was, budget preparation, council set aside monies to do the spay-neuter clinic reno. There was also a donation that was made adjacent to that, and we had, I think we darn near named the facility after the donation that came in. It didn't happen. In 2018, those funds then got spent somewhere else, which I'm not sure where they went. It dropped right off, and now it's showing up for 2020. So my question is, why is that a project that we're not considering and getting it done? We've approved it in the past a couple of years ago, and now it's kind of dropped off the radar.
Through your worship, I might ask Kristen to speak to that. I understand we did obtain drawings, so some of that money was spent. Anything that was not spent of the donation is held in a reserve. It wasn't used for something else. And ultimately, if we want to move forward with that, there is a space in the future capital budget where we would consider applying those drawings and actually doing the renovation. We had been exploring an opportunity to partner with another animal control group. I'm not sure exactly at this point where we are in those discussions, but it's something that we can likely bring back to the table.
Good, Your Worship. I believe Kate hit on it on the last part. The people who were the greatest proponents of this seem to have perhaps left the scene, I would say. So I'm not sure exactly the status of that project moving ahead. But we can certainly have a more fulsome report for council well ahead of, obviously, the 2020 budget, but we can have something on the next corporate services meeting where the proponents have gone. Opponents, I should say.
If no other questions, I'll recommend we take a 15-minute break.
Just before you sit down there, Kate, one of the very first things you showed us was a graph of what we're spending on capital versus what we should be spending based on, there we go, based on the AMP funding requirement. Where's that AMP funding requirement come from? What's in it?
So in 2013, we were required to implement an asset management plan for core infrastructure, and that was roads, bridges, water, and wastewater. We developed that plan in-house. It was actually myself and engineer Kevin DeLebeck that worked on that. So basically what we did was we took all of our existing core infrastructure, we came up with an estimated replacement date, an estimated replacement cost, and then smoothed out what that investment would be required over time in order to meet those replacements and regular investment, so asphalt resurfacing, those sorts of things. We, at that time, had an infrastructure deficit of approximately $10 million, and so this strategy helped us close that deficit. Our next asset management plan is going to include more than just core infrastructure. We're going to have parks assets, facilities, fleet in there as well. So while I expect that core infrastructure number to waver somewhat because we have better information and certainly more qualified people than Kevin and myself developing the plan, I do expect that number to grow as we have better information and more assets in the plan.
So the actual capital funding on this chart includes everything. The AMPF funding requirement includes only core?
That's right.
Okay, thank you. So we're running a little bit late, so let's get it going. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just like to thank Kate and staff in finance, and I have two managers here this morning. Oh, three managers here, Kristen and Adam and Brent Fisher. So thanks to them for the work they've done to get ready for capital budget. The first project shows up as a 17 project. This has been a multi-year project, and I'll tell you one that's been challenging for our staff. We're happy to see the last phase of the Harrison Park Electrical, and while it's in this year's budget, it is a project that will be debentured, and construction's well underway, about 65 to 70% complete with the construction update meeting tomorrow. So this will service 11 parks buildings and almost 100 sites in the campground.
Pam, I just have a quick question for Kate. How are we paying for, like when I look at the 2009, the 5-year payout here, 2019 we're paying out $771,000. And $650,000 of that is for the electrical and water upgrades. Mm-hmm. So, but we're not really paying that in 2019 because you've debentured that, correct?
We're debenturing 550, and the rest has been carried forward from previous year's budgets where we've collected the funding already. So we set that money aside, and now it's being used to fund the carry forward portion of the project. So These
what-
were all current year projects in previous years.
Right. So where do I go, how do I know the exact number that's coming out of the 2019 budget then?
So there's the recommended column that's highlighted in green. If you want to go back one page, Pam, I think you can see it. Or one more. Yeah, so the highlighted in green column is the full cost of the project. The next column where it says taxation, that is the amount of funding that is coming from the tax levy. And then the other columns demonstrate other sources of funding that are applied to these. So in total, the park's recommended budget for Parks and Cemetery is $2,336,000.
Okay, so.
Of that, $612,000 is coming from the tax levy.
Right. So you've debentured, you said 550,000 of that electrical and water upgrade?
Is recommended to be debentured, yes.
Right. So there's really only 100,000 we're paying on that this year.
Yes, and that money was collected from the taxpayer last year.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to the Kelso Beach electrical upgrade, this would be phase one with the design and electrical engineering component. Really, the goal is to make Kelso Beach friendlier in terms of large public events like Summer Folk. So it includes things like upgrading transformers, panels, and wiring. Councillor Dodd.
Thanks, Pam. Do we know, is this under the same kind of requirement that we had with Harrison Park, where Harrison Park, was the ECA or someone said that they weren't going to allow us to do any more connections anymore? Is that why we have to replace this Kelso Beach one?
Yeah, so just as a quick reminder for those of you who weren't here, Hydro One said to us several years ago that the utility within Harrison Park was going to be changed from being a public utility and given back to the City of Owen Sound. It was a gift that came with a lot of requirements for upgrades. So the Kelso Beach one is different, and although the park isn't ideally suited to host large events today, there is some electrical infrastructure, and the goal of this project is to look at the needs in that park in terms of the master plan and how that park's used, and come up with an electrical plan that would then come forward in a future capital budget in terms of a phase in and maybe even a partnership with some of our users there in terms of doing those upgrades.
I can confirm the last electrical upgrade would be approximately 20 years ago, Summer Folk 24, maybe 25, and we're at 43 now. I was on the other side for Folk Society. We got grants from Trillium to be able to do it because the city couldn't. We borrowed money from the city, got the electrical done, also tilted the land at the top of the amphitheater up a little bit to have better viewing, and it was with the Trillium grant, so there might be opportunities again with partners.
Pardon my ignorance, but who does this work for us?
The Harrison, you mean the Kelso Beach? Mm-hmm. We will do an RFP for the design consulting work.
So we'll be avoiding the major use time of it, or hopefully it will
when
be
we
done.
actually get into construction, yes. We would, just like Harrison Park where we're doing it in the off-season, we would be not wanting to interfere with any major events. Okay, so the next project is magnetic lock systems. These are programmable locks on 2 more public washrooms, both at Harrison Park and the East Side Boat Launch. So they automatically lock and unlock every day, and it does save staff time, and it adds a level of security to those buildings.
Are staff there anyways?
This gives staff the flexibility not to be there. So, many washrooms with people in the park, they want them open at 6:30 or 7. Staff can't be at every washroom and clean them and get to them. So this allows them to open and staff to get there on a rotation on their cleaning schedule.
So then why is this a low priority?
As Ms. Allen pointed out, the matrix is just more supportive of certain core infrastructure, and this just wouldn't be that. It's just the way the matrix scores these projects, and I do think it would be something that we'd want to revisit as a scoring tool going forward. This is a project, the Harrison Park Staff Washroom, and it is an 18 carry forward, and it will be done in-house with our facilities staff that work with Kristen. They just simply ran out of time this year with their assistants here at City Hall. So you can see by the pictures, this is a tired washroom, and it will upgrade both the women's and men's washrooms in the park shop. This is a partnership with the Reconciliation Garden Committee, and it was a recommendation from Community Services Committee that Council consider partnering and paying for the plaque. Education is certainly a major component of the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations, and the project didn't go ahead last year as that group is looking for funding to do the actual construction of the garden. So.
Do we know their planned costs overall for the whole project? And where they are with their fundraising, I guess would be the two questions.
They've got fundraising for their first phase of construction, which would be the medicine wheel down at the bottom and the closest to the trail. I don't remember off the top of my head what their overall funding is. I think that first phase is something in the $25,000 to $40,000 range that they fundraised for. And they had hoped to get to construction in the fall last year, but quite a bit fundraising goal, and now they anticipate construction in the spring.
The next project is the Duncan Fieldhouse improvements, and this project is actually underway now. Work began late in 2018 and will be complete early in the year. Really a focus on all the doors, and the trim will be replaced, the door hardware, washroom upgrade around accessibility, as well as in the small kitchen there, removing some type 1 asbestos with our own staff doing that work.
Pam, is that the end of it for Duncan McCollum Park, or are we still working on the grounds? And
We're still working on the grounds, and this year we're proposing, you'll see in a couple slides away probably, the continuation of the fencing there. So Centennial Tower bridge decking, again, we'll do this with our own staff. We waited late into the year as we were waiting on the structural assessment to be complete, and so we'll complete this with our own staff using composite boards and hopefully extend the life of that asset. Kelso Beach Campground Washroom. This again is sees thousands of visitors every year. This project again will be done in-house. We'll focus on the building envelope, fixtures, interior, and accessibility. And I think it's already started too, Kristen, if I'm not mistaken.
It has started, and especially with some of the seasonal facilities, if you don't mind, Campbell, just explaining that we get approval for them. We start them later in the fall when the camp season is after, and then we get partway through the year. We get as much done as we can, and then we'll carry forward the remainder of the funds. So for this project and Duncan as well, because a lot of the materials were purchased and we're going to carry out the attempts ourselves, so partitions, fixtures, washrooms, even the wall border ceilings, that's all purchased all the time in our staff.
And we got accessible money from the federal government for the washroom on the island at Harrison Park. Is that opportunity open for this?
I'll be reporting later. We made 2 applications under the Enabling Accessibility Fund, which is a federal program. One for the Harrison Park Community Center to upgrade those washrooms. One for the playground. We did receive notice that we weren't successful on the washroom project. So. The next project is the Alexandria Park improvements, and this is the park right at the bottom of St. Mary's Hill. It started in 2018. We removed a lot of the overgrown shrubs, and what was under there was decaying planters. So this money will be used to purchase material, rebuild, and purchase new plant material. As well, I think there's a neighborhood meeting plan to just make sure that that park, as we go forward, continues to meet the needs of that neighborhood. Stony Orchard Trail signage. This is a partnership with the Tom Thompson Trail Group, and this trail is along the East Bluff. It's a beautiful trail between 21st and 28th Street, and it's going to be used to construct a trailhead kiosk. The signage will also meet the AODA requirements. Councillor Grant.
My question on this is, what constitutes where a trail has to meet specific AODA requirements, or why we'd have to undertake this? Because we've got a multitude of various little trails that I don't think would be wise to be constructing little kiosks like this all over the city. I'm thinking of like Parkview Park that goes down to the fitness trail. Like, it's not very accessible, but I mean, that's...
Through you, Your Worship, what this will do is at a kind of a critical place on the trail is let users know what type of trail is ahead, what type of surface material. It'll provide a map sort of showing where you are, but the AODA guidelines do spell out what they would like in terms of signage on those trailhead kiosks, so that if I am someone with mobility issues, I know that, hey, it's pretty level terrain ahead, or as you mentioned in Parkview, hey, this is a pretty steep slope, probably an area where I want to steer clear of.
So we only encounter the AODA requirement because we're building the kiosk and putting the signage there. We don't actually have an obligation to have to do this.
Through you, Your Worship, if we're building a trail kiosk, not the trail itself, just the signage will need to comply. We work toward making our trails, accessible wherever we can. But yes, the accessibility requirement kicks in when you're building something new.
This is a little one, but I don't know. We've been fighting this, well, not fighting it, but we've kind of had this ongoing approval on signage for Orchard Park for many years, and it's kind of seemingly evolved. I'm not so sure I'm totally in favor of this. You've got a partnership with the Tom Thompson Group, but they're quite familiar with the trail, those users anyway. And it's kind of a neighborhood trail, but it's just me. Well, I was going to see what other discussion may have encountered, but at this time I'll make a motion that we remove this from the capital budget 16D 3.2.
Okay, is it possible to put this on the list to revisit?
Anything noted to be cut today or put on hold will be summarized, and the impact of that decision.
Can I also ask how much the partner is putting towards this?
Through Your Worship, the partner isn't funding this project in particular. That group has done a lot of work on that trail. They've done other signage on that trail, but they're not contributing to this actual component of the project. It's being funded through Parkland Reserves.
Yes.
The next project is the Harrison Park Island Channel masonry wall. There's a small section that's failed, and we'll form up a new wall and put a cap on to match as best we can, and we will use a contractor for this work.
Pam? Sorry. That river, do we ever clean that up? Like can that be done all at the same time, or is this just for the masonry?
Through Your Worship, last year, I think when the water levels are lower and there really is no water or fish in the channel, we do try to remove debris that collects in there over the summer.
And stones, like, I know I'm being picky, but like I remember as a kid, we used to walk those all the time. You never see anyone in there, but I wouldn't want to walk in there now either with all the stones and...
East of the fountain, we scrape and clean that every spring. West of the fountain, I know what you mean, there's a little bit of cobblestone that has gone in there, that's a little more naturalized, we cleaned out some vegetation in the spring last year with lots of stones.
Right. Okay, thanks.
And sorry, if I speak to it, we can consult with the Conservation Authority, and there's higher permit requirement, we're gonna get in there, and we can't remove some of that cobblestone.
Just wondering how many quotes we get on a job like this, because my concern is maybe it's going to be more expensive than $5,000. I thought that might have sounded kind of like a deal, getting into concrete work. I remember the Jervis Bay Park pillars were I think originally 8,000, it was over 18,000 when we were all said and done from memory, but I mean, 5 might be great.
Right. We, have you got a price on this, Adam? Is that how you base the budget? Or we'll likely get 3 quotes, although under our procurement policy, there isn't a requirement to get 3. We'll probably at least get a couple, so we have an idea of.
And I think there's some scale meters, bands that are very different as well.
As you go forward, I noticed there are several projects related to Harrison Park. It came to me that this might be an opportunity to put a list of potential donors towards Harrison Park rentals. If we could keep that in mind, please, and make an appeal, because there are several projects, including taking care of the birds.
Just, for Carol's information, there was, years ago, Friends of Harrison Park, and they did celebrate the 100th anniversary of Harrison Park, so I don't know, does that help us frame in the year?
It was 2014, maybe? No, 2012, I think.
So it was, they were going to raise money to rebuild the park and do all kinds of things, and put up one kiosk or donation can. Maybe there's a couple of them at Harrison Park that brings in a little bit of money a year.
We do receive those funds and put them in a reserve. As of right now, that reserve has $2,500 in it.
So it doesn't add up quickly.
No.
It's,
And I was thinking of a more, I don't know, I don't like the word aggressive around asking for money, but it's a more assertive marketing strategy. And again, this is because I don't understand the rules completely of our committees. I'm learning. But the economic development and tourism, is there a marketing part to that besides economic development that we could tap into to look at marketing our resources and asking for funds and donations, or even appealing to service clubs, Order of the Good Cheer? Every time people donate or groups donate to us, it's a double win.
It's a leverage.
We get the project, but we also save on the tax levy. So as a whole, everyone benefits.
Through your worship, I will try to highlight today where we do have partnerships, and you'll see in the operating budget, our bench program as well as the memorial tree program is funded and really does support the city not paying for those assets, but having donors. You will have a work plan that comes through economic development and tourism. It will include marketing and promotion. I can tell you, certainly between free skating and free swimming and event sponsorships, as then partnerships with groups like Kiwanis and the Order of Good Cheer, staff, we do work hard to, and we call it leveraging sort of our dollars with those projects.
If I could, Your Worship, certainly Mr. Fisher is here and other, we ask our partners, and Pam's mentioned some of them, Order of Good Cheer, they like to pick their project in partnership with us as opposed to us pick the project in partnership with them. The Kiwanis have been excellent to work with over the years, and we have private individuals who donate very much to our special events, and there does come a point where we have to be careful that we're going back to those wells for things in our capital budget, and they go, as all private donors do as well. There are many good causes out there that rely strictly on those type of donations, and we wouldn't want to get in their way. But where we have an opportunity, we always are looking for people to partner with us. But I'd hesitate to actually put it in our capital budget that this project wouldn't go without that donorship when we don't know who that would be. Just a couple of comments.
Agreed. I guess what I'm really looking for is a city's wish list. Let the public know what would be helpful and let them choose, if they choose to support them.
So the next project is the Harrison Park Bird Sanctuary, and you'll see that the fence is failing. The other thing, chain link fence isn't the best thing for bird housing, and it should be a different style of fence. So it will include new fencing as well as upgrades to the exotic or captive bird pens.
Thank you, Worship. Is this the area that's just, I guess, would be just north of the workshop?
Yes.
Is that the same place they use the snow storage? Because that's what that looks like, is snow storage from that photo, and that couldn't just be an accurate photo. That's just... So our fencing just collapsed like that just because of erosion or because of soft ground or?
Some erosion, some wear and tear. I can't speak to operations previous to 2016, but there's large amounts of snow storage there now.
So, okay, so my second question would be, $25,000 would be going towards doing the chain link fence. Is that for the entire project, or is only that one portion of, or be 1/5, because it's saying this is going to be going over a 5-year?
Through your worship, when staff were wrangling capital budget, I believe we had shown this over several years, kind of 5,000, and we made a decision that we'd bring it forward as one project. That would allow us to kind of do the work in one go, as opposed to a whole bunch of years then with mismatched and this is the Harrison Park pillar entrance. The Harrison Park is a designated cultural heritage landscape. These pillars are certainly landmarks as you enter the park, and this project would repoint those pillars. So not moving them or anything wild, but just repointing those so they continue to welcome visitors to the park. Harrison Park signage, this is a multi-year program. We've got a picture here of some of the signage that was done this year, and this is really directional signage for vehicles, pedestrians, as well as a new campground mat being planned for 2019.
The last two, and I'm looking at last year's budget, 18D3 Harrison Park entrance pillar and 18D5 Harrison Park signage. It was for $3,000. $35,000 was for the Harrison Park entrance pillar. Now we speed up to this year. Harrison Park entrance pillar, $5,000. It's D3, different year. D5 Harrison Park signage, same amount. We didn't cut those out of last year. I'm wondering, did some of the repointing get done? And that's why there's a $30,000 difference. Or it appears to me, comparing the both years, that nothing got done. And it was $35,000 last year, and this year it's $5,000. And then I'm not sure why they're not showing as carry forwards either.
Through you, your worship, the pillars, last year we had talked when we did the road project about widening the pillars out and making it easier for, you know, quite frankly, parks vehicles and trailers to maneuver that turn. The decision was made that, you know, they were original pillars, to leave them as they were. So rather than a $35,000 project, which would have actually taken them apart and moved them, we're bringing forward a repointing project. On the signage, it does show as an 18 project. The 18 money was spent. This is new money to continue on with the signage like you see there in the picture. I apologize for the confusion. It should have had a 19 number.
And I agree with the projects. My one question, with the width of the campers that are coming into the park now, is that a point of conflict where, like, that's a legitimate concern where it's not wide enough? Or like some people, like, you know, you're turning, your width radius or width is different when you're right on the curb there, so.
The trailers that are coming in, if they have a car coming out and they don't think they're going to, you know, be able to turn without having the radius turn into an oncoming, they'll just wait, let the car clear. I don't think there's a lot of conflicts down there. We haven't had a lot of any incidents. The Harrison Park Workshop Roof Inspection Scan. This is a flat roof, and the idea would be to have a roof scan. We don't have a lot of information in our asset management plan in terms of how old this roof is. So step one is a thermographic roof imaging. We'll look for moisture, a plan for the strategic investment and repair and capital investment in this building to make sure it's watertight.
Do we own a thermal camera already? I thought we bought one a few years ago.
There is a thermo imaging camera at Fire, but this is a bit different.
Yeah, this is done by a consulting firm, and what they do is they pick the ideal temperatures and time of day, usually in the evening, and then we'll have them come in and do a thermal scan, so they'll show hot spots or wet spots
question is, I have 3 points to this question. Should this analysis be done on all city-owned buildings? Is this equipment expensive to own and operate? And should we consider investing this for future use?
So the very first question that you asked is that it is happening on all of our buildings. So through our asset management plan and also just our management of our facilities as well, is that we went through a great deal of them and do this audit of our facilities as well. So we have that in, you'll see it in the 4-year, the 5-year forecast, or within our records of if it's past 5 years that we have those documents. Your second question, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah. It's a consulting company that comes in, and also our arrangement with that consulting company is that they actually provide the inspection, they provide the inspection report once it's done, and they do our tender document and project management for replacements as well.
If I can I think, get to the councillor's point, is it more economically efficient to buy ourselves this camera so we can do the roof scans ourselves? I think what you're saying is we rely on the technical expertise of this company to not only do the scan, but then to provide the recommendations on which we build our 5-year budget. They help us also prepare the tender or the RFP documents for the roof work. They also provide inspections together with Kristen so that we're making sure that we don't have leaky roofs going forward.
So it's really value added. It's not just the piece of
Right.
equipment.
Yeah.
Very well money spent.
More of a general comment. With Brian, I wasn't a child at the park, but my children have certainly been there, and I think most of us at this table would agree that if anything sort of pulls on your emotional heartstrings, it's remembering your kids, and I suspect grandkids, and what it meant to us having a park. And I'm just wondering what we're seen to be doing here, repointing some bricks at the entrance, sticking up some signs, maybe replacing some fences. It seems ad hoc, and it seems to lack what ideally I would like to see as a vision almost analogous to the Riverfront Precinct. I would like council to think about that as we're going ahead this year. I suspect that there would be appetite in this town. Anybody driving down that laneway sees a very tired park until you get to the spectacular, I think it was Kiwanis, wasn't it? The playground, and obviously the ice rink. I mean, there are jewels that just speak of investment there, but it only highlights some of the more rundown characteristics of the park. So perhaps, Pam, I can speak to you privately about this, but I personally would like to see us dream a big revisioning of Harrison Park. And I don't know if Kristen would be objecting to that, but I'd like to see that. It seems very small and ad hoc, what we're being asked to approve here.
Through your worship, I guess for me, watching the capital budget over the last now 19 years, I can tell you that the commitment of the last council to making improvements at Harrison Park based on the park master plan has outdone anything done in many years before that. So I've been, there was a day I toured a previous city manager, and I know Wayne will be mindful of time, and when I go through the park, and my kids get crazy when I do this because I see the needs of the park, and but we've made incredible strides in the last few years to close that gap. The investment in the road, the wall rebuilding that we've done, the pool, the partnership with Kiwanis around the playground, our future partnership with Kiwanis that's in this budget around the other playground. We've made incredible strides in that park. Last year, I don't know what the capital budget was in Harrison Park, the trail. Probably $1.5 million at the park, and then the electrical infrastructure. So some of the things you maybe can't see, the rec master plan completed last year says now start on a process of upgrading your master plans, and I know in our work plan that we'll be coming forward with, the Harrison Park plan is the oldest in the series of parks plan dating back to 2002, so that's probably the one that's highest on our list. So I guess the long answer is we'd love to reimagine Harrison Park with council.
further to that, you're saying the plan we're working off, Pam, and I agree there's been a lot done. I mean, it could absorb a ton of money. I get that. It's a huge acreage for a town of our size. I think it's almost equivalent, maybe Springbank Park comes to mind in London, but in terms of size. But the plan we're working off is about 16 years old?
2002.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so it's due for an upgrade, or an update for sure. The next project is a park fuel system. So we have gas, diesel, dyed diesel at our park and cemetery, and this project would, the current tanks are past their useful life. It will, they don't meet today's fuel handling codes, so this project will bring them into compliance, and it would be funded through a small surcharge on our per liter consumption of gas. The Harrison Park pool mechanical room upgrade. Last year we did a big upgrade to the pool and went from 2 tanks to 1. And this really has 2 components. One is replacing the pump, so it has a variable operating speed frequency, way better in terms of energy consumption. And then also the sand filters. There is a leak in the sand filter. If you were a swimmer last summer, you may have noticed a little bit of sand in the pool, so repairing that sand filter. So next, the Harrison Park Pool Road. So this is the road that really goes from the senior center back to the Harrison Park pool, and the road is tired, and it would be excavated, new granulars, and asphalt.
And I might let Carol speak. You were going to say something on the last slide before I speak to that one.
Sorry.
Or-
Sorry. Oh, sorry. I think maybe the best thing to do in terms of recognizing savings is looking, when we get to the operating budget this year, we've made a significant investment in the Bayshore Community Center in terms of energy efficiency, variable speed pumps and motors and lighting. And while our energy consumption, the bill isn't down, if we look, and Kristen does a tremendous job of tracking utility use as well as cost, our utility use is way down. So to your question is how we're going to measure this, and we will be able to know, hey, how much hydro, how many kilowatt hours did we use last year when we were operating the inefficient stuff, and what will we use going forward? So we do track that and would be able to report on that.
And maybe just to add to that, Pam, if you don't mind, is that, you know, when we do pump replacements or any energy efficient upgrades, is that they're indirect or direct cost savings. So direct, we want to see financial gain. And I think what our job is too, as well, is to educate and almost to look at some of those indirect cost savings that we see. So when we install a new pump, for example, in this room, with some of the soft start or variable frequency drivers, that the indirect cost savings that we see is less runtime, less maintenance, less repairs, and a longer lifespan of replacement of the gas. So those are some of the indirect cost savings that we see as well, not just the financial.
So that information obviously is communicated annually when we go through a budget review. Do you do it before budget review? We need to celebrate the successes. When we approve a project and there's been some benefit to all of us, it would be helpful to have that promoted and publicized.
Kristen did a tremendous report on energy consumption. I think it went through Community Services, and I'm happy to send it out and share it with you, and then you'll sort of get a sense of what you would see going forward.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
And if I could speak to the next slide, 19D7. We've got $650,000 in gas tax that was mentioned to us to utilize. I agree with every asphalt repaving project later on in engineering. They're highly used roadways. We've got so many in this city which could use that expenditure elsewhere. And right off the bat, I just think of, I repeatedly hear from people that ride the bus or decide not to ride the bus on Brook because 23rd Street West, for instance, is so rough. And we may not think that we pay for it, But we absolutely do pay for it, because while we don't own those buses right now, when that next tender comes in 2 years, it's going to reflect what that operational cost is on your equipment, whether we own it or don't own it. Further, it does affect and impact all our municipal vehicles that much more, and it impacts the ratepayer twice, both in the pocketbook and then personally when they drive to Mazda or Hal Wrights or wherever they want to choose to get suspension work done. So I would make a motion that this particular project be set aside for consideration, further discussion, removed at this time. Anyone's welcome to join me for the walk a mile in her heels. It's done in June. Carolyn and Marion may choose to miss it, but I'm yet to break a high heel walking on that. I admit it's not great, but we've got so many other uses and needs that are above this in the city that's my motion, is to remove 19D7 at this time.
The price seems high. I have to say, though, if Councillor Grigg is suggesting the city can just afford, in terms of its image, to allow thousands of tourists to see that on an annual basis, I can't support that.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just going to make the comment. I think I hear both sides of it. Obviously, we do know that looking at in the engineering reports that $100,000 of the gas tax can actually really do about 2 streets from what I saw later on in the report. We do know, in response to Councillor Tamming's comment, we do know the vast majority of individuals who are using the Harrison Park pool are mostly campground users. So I would also support saying, yes, that is an eyesight and an eyesore to some of those users, but some of those users are actually coming from the side further south and not actually using that roadway. I would support Councillor Gregg looking at it and at least having a review of that with other potentially more serious resurfacing projects.
Just weigh in for a minute. We have lots of needs for paving in this town. We all know it, and we hear it. I will tell you, when people come to my office and they say, I'm thinking of coming to Owen Sound, whether it's a business or residence, I always ask them, what's bringing you here? I have to tell you, I have been shocked over the last 5 years. It isn't the hard services. It isn't the roads. Once you're here, you appreciate whether they're good or not. It is the soft services, and one of the soft services is mentioned continually, I must tell you, is Harrison Park. And I go, huh. And thus, we have invested more in Harrison Park. We got a long way to go. This road was up for discussion in our group. And quite frankly, we said, if not now, when? Because with the pool being done last year, I drove that road more last summer than I have in 10 years. It's in tough shape. But if not this year, certainly it'll be next year. But so we discussed this internally, but I will tell you, people come to Owen Sound for the soft services, and Harrison Park is one of those that gets mentioned. But we have lots of roads that are not in good shape as well. It's a tough call.
I just want to say, I'm not going to support this motion just because of exactly what you said. We'll never afford to do this paving job if we don't do it now, because that will never change. There will always be the 23rd Streets in Owen Sound forever and ever. It's just a matter of fact, so I won't support that one.
Thanks, everybody. And I appreciate that concern, and people see it, and people experience it. But they're driving at 10, 15 kilometers an hour back to the pool, those that do. It's not an impediment to travel. And as I said, it's going for further discussion. If you drove into the park right now, you'll experience more wear on your vehicle through the tunnel, the illumination tunnel. That road is in worse shape, and it's much more used by so many more people. So what I'm saying is, this isn't the right project for that money. We've got other projects that can be looked at that are in a higher need. So at this time, we've got better choices we can make.
The next project is a small washroom in the Harrison Park campground. This project will feature or focus on the building envelope, fixtures, interior accessibility. The envelope, we won't do a roof scan, we're going to replace the roof. It's important to our image for visitors and people who live here. It will be done with our own staff. Next, the campground site ID posts. This is purchasing new 6x6 posts with the Harrison Park Electrical and Water Project. There's a slight sort of rejigging and renumbering of those campground sites, so new posts will match the image in the campground. The Harrison Park Kitchen Building, this is a building where campers congregate, particularly in the rainy weather, but not always. It just needs some interior TLC, ceiling, painting, sink, counters, and it, again, will be done by our own staff. Very similar project in what we call the laundromat building. Harrison Park Campground Bridges, there's 3 small wooden pedestrian bridges that cross Weavers Creek in the park. This will be used to purchase the materials, and the work will be done in-house with park staff. Oh, Harrison, maybe we took it out. Maybe I went by it. Oh, sorry. The Harrison Park Community Hall accessibility upgrades, as I mentioned, we had hoped to upgrade the washroom in this building. There's stairs down to it. We had applied for an enabling accessibility grant. The city's contribution through tax was going to be $53,000, and we just heard late last week that we weren't successful in that grant. So I would suggest that that money would be available, the tax portion of that, for other projects. Harrison Park Trails. Trails are something that provides free recreation opportunities for people that live here, and they're also very important in terms of the requests that we're getting through our tourism office. They're very popular, and this money would be used to upgrade the fitness trail. There's several sections that wash out, so similar to the Mile Drive work that was done, excavating larger granular compacted on top.
Go ahead, Scott.
In that area.
I support this, and I supported it last year, and here's another one where I'm wondering where the funds went from last year that aren't showing as carry forward this year, because we approved this last year, same dollar amount. And why didn't it get done? And I feel like the taxpayers are now being asked to pay twice for it. So where'd the money go last year?
Adam's just mentioning that the money from this project was allocated to do the parking lot at the north end at the 2nd Avenue East, and also pay for benches along that trail in that section. So the money was used on trail, just a different section last year. Okay.
Go ahead, Kate.
One of the things I'll make sure we have for our next capital meeting as well is an update on all of our 2018 capital programs, so you can see what was spent and what was perhaps carried over or deferred. We'll say our 2018 capital program in total was fully spent, if not overspent, so certainly everything we collected for capital last year has been utilized, but I'll make sure we have that for the 23rd.
The next project are Harrison Park P gates, and we have sort of an ongoing continued program of replacing these swing gates. A number of them are aged and rusted and bent, and the new gates are AODA compliant, the P gate shape, which is on the right in your pictures. At the north end on the fitness trail side, sort of by 4th Street East entrance, that parking area and the entrance is in pretty tough shape. This project would include new bollards in that area, new posts to keep people sort of on track, some excavation smoothing out and granular applied in partnership with our public works staff.
Just wondering if this is a project that could be split in half and then done over 2 years, so 10,000 and 10,000. Well, that's, yeah, is that a viable option? Yeah, I mean, that makes sense from a smart purchasing perspective to do that firsthand then.
Consider that a part of one of our operations, but then those bollards are going to create the equipment that has to work around. So you don't unload the bollards, have the equipment do some excavation and work around your gardens. Bollards, once that equipment is
I think there is certainly some efficiency to doing the project as a complete unit, but if it's council's wish to separate it, we'd certainly work on a plan to achieve that.
I'd have no problem looking at separating it, but I'd like to hear from other councillors if there's any other thoughts on that.
Sorry, just to be clear, then, if you put the bollards in first, then it's more costly to do the rest of it later because they have to work around the bollards, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
The next project, is the Harrison Park bollards. There's a number of bollards. These are 6x6 posts in the park that help keep our cars where they're supposed to be. To the right, where the new road was built or reconstructed last year, we need some bollards there. So this would be a project in Harrison Park up by the pool. There's several areas where the posts are rotting or in rough condition.
And would this include adding new
Yes.
ones?
Yeah.
On your way in on the right-hand
Yes.
side where,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
The Harrison Park Senior Center abatement, there was a water leak, and the water leak has been stopped, but we did a designated substance survey. There is asbestos, excuse me, and mold in this building, and this project would do that remediation in the Harrison Park Senior Center. The seniors are contributing $3,000 towards this project.
Just generally on the Harrison Park Senior Center, I know it gets used, but used by a very small group. Could community services at some point look at a better use or some type of revenue generation for this facility?
Maybe I'll help Ms. Coulter here if I could, Your Worship. I think over the years that has been discussed. It's a very difficult conversation to have, but perhaps we would have that discussion again with no promises of how it will turn out. It is a small group. It's a very vocal group. It's a very strong group. And we'll do our best.
Well, given the success of the amalgamation of the Bayshore retirees with the Active Lifestyle Center, hopefully this third group can...
I certainly agree with your theory, but putting that into practice may be a challenge, but we will do our best.
Yeah. And sometimes with time and experience, so I know I sort of recoiled at the idea, but certainly willing to give it a try. We've got lots of ideas on how we might generate revenue with that building. So.
Well, Mr. Ritchie, you started off saying that something along the lines in the future we may not be able to afford the assets that we have. What do we have, 67 buildings that we manage, or 68 or something?
78.
How many?
78.
78. We're providing a building to Active Lifestyle that's doing something very similar. I know there's people doing something similar at Active Building and Active Lifestyles as well as the Bayshore. I think there's similar things going on at the Legion, and the Legion is having trouble making ends meet as the demographics have changed. At some point, we're going to have to make a tough decision on this building, and you know, can we afford it? Can we continue to afford it? Yes, it's a vocal group, but sometimes you got to make tough decisions that aren't popular. I just wonder when that decision is coming, but anyway.
I think,
sorry. Just further to that, is there a possibility that we can see the list of buildings and the ones, sort of the utilization and the costing, so we can start to have a flavor should we have to face those tough decisions?
we can send you out a list of city-owned buildings today.
And utilization and costing, so it's almost to help us with the understanding, because we're making decisions about funding.
So I think if I'm hearing council that, you know, staff would initiate a discussion, and often our role is sort of kind of to put groups together to talk about how they might work together, and we'll sort of reopen that dialogue. This project was through Community Services Committee recently in a report that Kristen did. There was a proposal from the tenant to do a joint project that would join those washroom facilities, the inside and the outside, with the tenant doing maintenance. And with the approval of the capital budget, Kristen will initiate the discussions on amending that lease agreement. So this is another partnership with the tenant carrying forward, or carrying $20,000 of that cost, bringing forward 10 from last year that was allocated to this project, now doing sort of an expanded project, a little bit more money from both the city and the tenant, but certainly a needed project.
Thank you. So in the description where it says in 2017, 10.5, does that really mean 2018?
Yes. Or may,
That was approved, 10,500 was approved for the original project, I believe it was in 2017.
Right.
For us just to do the 3 exterior washrooms. Proposal came through from the Harrison Park Inn owner to say, can we push pause on that project, look at a partnership and open up in between the exterior public washrooms and the interior washrooms. And we did so we pushed pause on that project, entertained that idea, and we took a report to committee late in 2018, I believe, in December, and then we looked at doing a larger scale project for $40,000 for contributing 50% of that.
Okay, so I'm hearing that a lot of the dollars last year allocated weren't used for specific projects, but yet I'm hearing that all the money was used, so...
no, this project, we took the 10.5 that was allocated in 2017. When that request came in late in 17, we just held that money, set it aside, and Kristen, we sort of explored with Joanne what did it mean in terms of this partnership. Kristen wrote the report to committee. So I think, Kate, those funds are set aside and they would be carried forward to half fund our half of the project.
Yeah, through your worship, if you look down at the bottom for the funding sources, where it says carried forward, that means that we've retained the funds that we collected and held on to them. If for some reason we had spent those funds on something else and had to re-budget for it, you won't see anything in the carry forward column. It will be fully funded in the current year. But anything where we've sort of retained those funds and held on to them until the time the project went forward, we have those in a reserve from those previous years they were collected.
Right, but Councillor Gregg has identified a few projects that money was set aside in 18. One of them was 35,000, and we're only proposing 5,000 now, but yet you're saying the 30,000 was spent somewhere else.
That 35,000 for the front pillars at Harrison Park was not ultimately approved in 2018. It wasn't part of our plan. So those funds never made it through the budget process.
Yeah, it wasn't an approved budget.
Okay, I guess my bottom line question is, if money's been used from 2018 for something else, we'd certainly like to know what it was used for.
There was some money that was allocated for the pool project, and that was detailed in a report through Community Services and came to council. Trying to think of other things. I know
Where normally that information will come forward to is when the treasurer does her year-end summary of all capital projects. Normally that's where you get that. We didn't spend it here, we allocated it over here. It should be prefaced by a report earlier in the process telling you we're doing that. So it wouldn't normally be all encompassed in this process.
I just want to say I wholeheartedly agree and did last year with all the internal upgrades for the buildings at the park and around the city as well. And again, with the ones in the budget here. But my question is, we have 2 contractors basically on staff, which I think 3 years ago when we added that to the budget was an extremely wise investment, and we've got a terrific value out of them. But as we go through, I guess they can both kind of do about $60,000 of work, $70,000 of work kind of a year. Like, you can only do so much. How do we know at what point, like, is that construction of 40,000 and it says majority of the work will be completed in-house? Is that all material? Is that labor hours? Like, and then once we get into the operational, and the same with the engineering, in-house engineering, it's very difficult to follow that along and then see, have we allocated ourselves to $180,000 to projects, but the two individuals that we're using are, you know, $140,000 benefits in. That's my question. It's very difficult to follow and know that when are they fully expended and when are they not, I guess.
So just to touch on that, when we do our work plans or especially our capital planning for this, is that it is a very heavy workload with regards to, you know, I'll speak for parks employees and facilities employees and property employees as well, is that, you know, we set a work plan and our capital in order to what we feel that we can achieve. And we have to focus on our staff carry out operational responsibilities, not just capital as well, so our day-to-day maintenance. So they add value and are part of that planning process, which I think is probably one of the most important things that we can do as project managers in order to, you know, have the input of those staff to carry the work out. With regards to the breakdown, each project is different. There are certain things that our staff will not complete. Electrical, for example, we're not qualified electricians, so we contract that work out. There's also a special service or a epoxy floor spray. We contract that work out. Where we see a cost savings would be with partitions. So if we're renovating a washroom and we have to purchase the partitions, I won't call purchase them, but I will pay for the install and our guys will install. So we see the cost savings there. The general rule of thumb is what we use, and it tends to work out well, is that if you're hiring a contractor to do something, you can almost double that price. It can be saved probably 50%. So some of those, this $40,000 will be a little bit of contract work, which we're not qualified to do, and we're fine with that. Plumbing permits or building permit, if we have to do that, we make sure that we purchase those through the city as well. And then a lot of it is the building and material.
The next project's at St. George's Park, and it's the partnership with Canadian Mental Health, and there is an agreement between CMHC and a partnership with the city around the development of that food forest there. And last year, they had brought a request through Community Services Committee that was really referred to budget in terms of support for some of those park fixtures. So 3 benches, a bike rack, and 2 garbage or waste receptacles. So it was referred to budget. The cost for those 6 items would be $9,500. So there is no contribution from CMHA here, but they've made a significant contribution to the development of that space. The Victoria Park picnic shelter and play structure. This project is 100% funded through a generous donation from the Warlow family to the Family Y. It will eventually become a city asset. So the Parks Master Plan for the area showed a playground and a shelter in the space. And the plans for the space and an agreement with the Y with respect to the donation and the asset will come forward through Community Services Committee.
With this, I know this is a master plan. It's great that we're getting a donation for. Will this have any kind of impact back on to how the Fall Fair does their operations?
This is in an area that's sort of tucked up north of the parking lot. If you can imagine that sort of, there's a little bit of a green triangle. So while there may have been overflow parking, it really isn't any part of the Fall Fair setup.
Okay.
We have been able to do a partnership with MTO to provide extra parking for the Fall Fair.
I'm sorry, Pam, I just have to back up. I just see too many troubles, potential problems with 19D20. I've got concerns with operations. Says for years now we've been trying to get a handle on garbage containers sitting everywhere where people drop off excessive litter, and then the benches back in where they're located, I just see additional problems with loitering and so forth. I just think this is $9,500 that we're inviting trouble here. So nice project and good ideas, but boy, I think this is one where bringing a lawn chair for a break here and there might be better than the trouble that we might be soliciting, because there's the stairs that go up to Victoria Park right adjacent. There's graffiti at the back of Strathcona School. I just see a lot of trouble there. So I'd make a motion that we set this $9,500 aside.
Motion's on the floor. Anyone want to speak to it? Go ahead.
I'm already on. My only question would have been, like, some of these, I know, like, the waste receptacles that we were looking at there, those are like the decorative waste receptacles that we have at downtown core, which are, you know, what, $1,000, $1,200 a piece. Did we, I know that says here this is what we're committing to from that original motion back from community services, and I guess my question would be, do we need to actually commit that much to it? You know, you see it at Coppin Ridge. Coppin Ridge is a beautiful establishment, and they have a Jolly's bike rack associated there. No, they don't have anything decorative, fancy, whatever. So I guess my thing is, I think it is essential to, if the CMHA did go out of their way to do a capital project that enhances that core, whether there's some graffiti on Strathcona or not, they took an initiative to beautify a section of the city that wasn't seeing that beautification previously. My question would just be whether we can reduce that amount, that physical amount.
Through your worship, if council wanted to reduce that, I think we could work with CMHA and identify which of those pieces that they feel are most important to the project.
I'm not sure if everyone's been back in there. They've done one heck of a job, and they've got, especially in labor, much more of an investment in there than we do. To the best of my knowledge, they have not suffered vandalism to their place to much of an extent. There maybe have been a little bit. It used to be different when Strathcona was there and the kids were going from there up the stairs, but it's kind of a lost corner that wasn't being used much at all, is being used. It is a heck of a program that they're using. When you hear the success of clients, I suppose, being involved in that area, and how this is helping those clients and helping them, it's a pretty nice project that we haven't had to put any really much into it. I think maybe we put some water or something into it, but not much. So it's, to me, you cut it if you want a little bit, but I think it's an important project.
I just worry, is the lighting any better in there? We've never done anything with lighting. Because it's so dark. The only thing I would agree with Scott is maybe we're creating a hangout. Like, if we don't have vandalism now, maybe, you know, you throw in a couple of benches there and you create a hangout, and that becomes a problem. But I don't know.
I would counter that. I would say you have a baseball diamond literally 30 feet away that has bleachers, that has a seating area that already could be a hangout that isn't being used as a hangout. If you were going to see some sort of hangout currently already there that would entice some sort of vandalism or graffiti, it would be present. You have a larger scale of an area that is, whether lighting's there or not, that could already be impacting that. So having a bench that's literally 30 feet away, that's in front of an area that is going to be utilized by a nonprofit organization that got nationwide credibility through Aviva Insurance to get that, to promote that, I don't see it. I don't see that there. I see if there was going to be complications, we would already see those complications.
No, thanks.
I would amend my motion to a ceiling cap of $5,000. I agree largely with what Travis has said. And the bike rack's a great example. You see them around town, Jollies or Bike Face. I mean, it's something that's worth somebody looking to see if it just can be sponsored by somebody. So that would be my motion, is to amend 19D20 to $5,000.
Did we have a partner that wanted to help us with that? So that's not a for sure. I've received several emails and comments through the mayor's telephone about this, that boats are getting damaged. It's been neglected for a little while and needs to be done.
Inner Harbor benches, this is a project to replace existing and aged benches with new benches and also allow staff funds to upgrade where possible the existing benches.
The question I have is, how many benches do we have in total? I agree with the project, but out of curiosity's sake and our replacement of them.
I don't know off the top of my head. We'd have to.
Yeah, and I sort of had a count in the fall, and I've lost that. And if I remember, I can bring
We can let you know.
Oh, I think
Longer. The benches on Main Street. Yeah, the benches on Main Street have been there since 2000, so we'll get. This is the west side boat launch, and these are magnetic locks to open those and close those each day. The great thing about these are they're programmable. We can set them in the fishing season to be open at 4 a.m. when boaters are arriving to launch their boats.
Excuse me.
Maybe.
Oh, sorry.
When the comments are made in the sections regarding saving HR time, you know, I would appreciate having some guesstimate about paid man hours, because then it helps put it in perspective.
Right.
So as we go through, or even in the future, what are we looking at?
Right.
And
Is
would
it a
be
half
really,
an hour of staff
it would be
time plus a
extremely-
vehicle? Sure,
Yeah, extremely helpful. Thank you.
we can do that.
Might I suggest, Your Worship, because I believe Ms. Coulter probably has some time left to go, that we take a quick break for lunch and get back at it?